For 40 years, Walter ate dinner alone. He believed his heart had turned to dust long ago. But on a cold autumn night in 1987, two shadows moved through the darkness towards his isolated ranch house. They were starving and desperate. He caught them red-handed. A boy, no more than 8, and his little sister, clutching a loaf of bread and a tin of corned beef they'd taken from his porch. The boy didn't run. Instead, he looked up at the giant of a man, voice cracking with a fear that had nothing to do with being punished. "Please, mister, don't take our food. We saved all day for this." In that sentence, Walter didn't hear a thief's excuse. He heard an echo of a hunger he thought he'd forgotten. And for the first time in 4 decades, the dust in his heart stirred. The standoff on the porch stretched for a lifetime in those few seconds. Walter Macklin was a man of few words, a man whose conversations were with cattle and the weather. Human speech, especially the pleading kind, had rusted in his throat. He looked at them, not just at them but into them. The boy's shoes were split open. The girl's dress was a summer floral, utterly useless against the October chill. Their hunger wasn't just in their hollow cheeks. It was in the way they stood, a brittle defensiveness that spoke of more than one missed meal. Saved all day for this. The words hung in the air. Walter's mind, usually a slow-turning mill of chores and memories, began to turn faster. To save for something means you have a goal. You have a hope. These children, stealing from a stranger's porch in the dark, still had a hope. That, more than anything, was what pierced him. He finally moved, not forward, but sideways, opening the door wider. The gesture was stiff, unpracticed. "Well, you better come in and eat it, then, before you freeze solid out here." It wasn't an invitation. It was more like a gruff order. But it was the first time he'd spoken to invite anyone into that house since 1947. The world inside Walter Macklin's house was a world of one. Every object, every silence, testified to a life lived in profound solitude. Eli and Sarah stood just inside the door, like trespassers in a sacred, sad space. Walter moved to the stove, his back to them, filling a kettle. The normalcy of the action was absurd. He pointed with a calloused finger to the kitchen table. "Sit." They sat, perching on the very edge of the chairs, their stolen treasures still clutched to their chests. Walter took the can from Eli's hand. Their eyes followed it, a momentary flare of panic. But he didn't throw it out. He opened it with a manual can opener, the sound loud in the quiet. He found a second plate, dusty from a high cabinet, and wiped it with his sleeve. He heated the corned beef in a pan, the savory smell filling the room. He sliced the bread. He set 2 places at the opposite end of his own solitary spot. 2 glasses of milk appeared. The children watched, mesmerized not by the food, but by the ritual. Someone was making them food. The sound of children eating at his table was an echo from a lifetime ago. It was a sound that lived in the walls of this house, buried under layers of silence. Every cautious sip, every small chew, was a hammer tap on a sealed vault in Walter's soul. He couldn't look at them. Instead, he looked at the photograph on the wall. The young woman, Eleanor, seemed to look back at him from the past, her smile a silent question. His jaw worked. He had questions of his own, but they were lodged deep. He finally spoke, his voice aiming for practicality to mask the earthquake inside. "Where's your folks?" Eli stopped chewing. He looked at Sarah, who had a milk mustache. He set his fork down with a resolve too old for his years. "Our mom. She went to the city to find work. A few months ago. She said she'd send for us. She left us with Mr. Harris, at the motor court down the road. But he said the money ran out last week. Told us we had to leave." The statement was delivered with a devastating matter-of-factness. Walter understood. The motor court was a collection of rundown shacks. He knew Harris, a mean, small man. These children weren't just hungry for a night. They were abandoned. The past and the present collided in that quiet kitchen. The ghost of his son, the echo of his wife's sorrow, and the living, breathing reality of 2 abandoned children sitting in their chairs, eating from their plates. The dam of 40 years broke. Not with a wail, but with a quiet flood that cleansed the dust from his soul. Eli saw it. He saw the man inside the monument of grief. Walter stood up, the chair scraping loudly. He walks not to the door, but to a hallway. Eli watches, confused. Walter returns with 2 thick wool blankets. He gestures to the old sofa in the living room. "You'll sleep there. Too dark and cold to be out now." It wasn't a question. It was a decision. The rancher was no longer just a man defending his property. He was a man reclaiming his purpose. He gently lifted the sleeping Sarah and carried her to the sofa, tucking the blanket around her with an awkward, forgotten tenderness. Eli followed, watching every move. Walter never did find the children's mother. Some said she'd moved on to a different life. Others feared a worse fate. But a telegram and a few dollars weren't the end of the story. They were the beginning. The county tried to place Eli and Sarah in a home miles away. Walter, who hadn't been to a town meeting in 30 years, stood up in a crowded room and spoke 3 words. "They're my responsibility," and that was that. The law saw an old rancher, but anyone with eyes could see a grandfather. The fortress gates had opened, not to let the world in, but to let love out again. He didn't adopt them by paper, but by every other measure that counts, by teaching, by feeding, by staying up through fevers, by cheering at a school play. They became his. The boy who saved all day for a stolen can of food taught a man who had saved nothing from his grief for 40 years how to spend his love again. The loneliness didn't end because people came into his house. It ended because he found a reason to step outside of himself. Walter Macklin ate his last years of dinners not alone, but surrounded by the beautiful, chaotic noise of a family found, not born. And in that noise, he finally heard the answer to the silence that had plagued him for so long. That kindness is not just a gift you give, but a lifeline you throw to your own stranded heart. Sometimes the family you choose is the one that chooses you back, in the middle of the darkest night, with nothing but a stolen can of food and a courage that can change a lifetime. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft blues and pinks, Walter was already at the stove. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was new for that house at that hour. He worked with a quiet focus, cracking eggs into a bowl, stirring pancake batter. He didn't speak much, but his actions spoke volumes. He set 3 places at the table. Not 2, 3. Eli woke first, the unfamiliar comfort of the sofa and the thick blanket confusing him for a moment. He sat up, his eyes finding Walter in the kitchen. The old man simply nodded towards the table. "Wash up. Pumps out back." It was an instruction, not a request, the first thread in the fabric of a new routine. Sarah stirred, rubbing her eyes. For a terrifying second, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Eli, and Walter's broad back at the stove, and the memory of food and safety washed over her. She shuffled to the table, still wrapped in her blanket. Walter placed a stack of pancakes in the center, a jar of homemade syrup, a plate of crispy bacon. It was a feast. They ate in a silence that was no longer heavy with fear, but filled with the simple, profound sounds of a shared meal. The clink of a fork, the pour of milk, a satisfied sigh. After breakfast, Walter went about his chores. But he didn't go alone. He handed Eli a small bucket. "Eggs need collecting. Hens don't care if you're tired." Eli followed him a step behind, watching everything. In the coop, Walter showed him how to gently slide a hand under a broody hen, how to tell a fresh egg from an old one. Eli's small hands, careful and deliberate, mimicked the old man's movements. Sarah followed them at a distance, eventually finding a kitten from the barn and sitting in a patch of sun, the animal purring in her lap as she watched the 2 most important people in her new world. Days turned into a week. Walter drove the old truck into town. He went to the telegraph office and composed a short, blunt message to the last known address for the children's mother. He paid for a return receipt. He stopped at the general store and bought 2 sets of sturdy overalls, 2 flannel shirts, socks and boots that actually fit. He didn't ask the children what they wanted. He assessed what they needed. When he handed the bundles to Eli that evening, the boy's eyes welled up. He wasn't used to gifts. He was used to scarcity. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. Walter just grunted. "Can't have you ruining what's left of your shoes. Work to do." But the outside world began to press in. A social worker from the county, a kind but overworked woman named Mrs. Gable, heard rumors from the motor court about the old rancher and the 2 children. She arrived one afternoon in a dusty sedan. Walter met her on the porch, his arms crossed. She explained the situation gently. The children were wards of the state. They needed to be placed in a proper foster home. There were procedures. Walter listened, his face like granite. He looked past her, to where Eli was pretending to fix a fence post with a hammer, glancing over every few seconds with naked anxiety. Sarah was peeking from behind the curtains in the front window. "I understand your procedures, ma'am," Walter said, his voice low. "But you see those children? Their procedure was being left to starve. Their procedure is here now. They're fed. They're safe. They're learning. That's the only procedure that matters on this land." Mrs. Gable was firm but compassionate. "Mr. Macklin, I appreciate what you've done, truly. But you're a single, elderly man. The state has standards for placements. There's a lovely family over in Millerton with experience." "No." The word cut through the air, final as a slamming door. "They're not going to Millerton. They're staying here." "Mr. Macklin, I don't have the authority to just—" "Then who does?" Walter interrupted. "Tell me who I need to talk to. I'll talk to them." And so, the following Tuesday, Walter Macklin, in his one good suit that hung loose on his frame, walked into the county courthouse. He hadn't been in that building since he'd signed the deed to his land 50 years prior. The meeting room was full of officials, the air smelling of old paper and bureaucracy. When the issue of Eli and Sarah was raised, Walter stood up. Every eye turned to him. He cleared his throat, the sound rough in the quiet room. "I'm Walter Macklin," he began, his voice gaining strength. "I own the ranch west of town. Those 2 children you're talking about, they came to my door hungry. They had nobody. Now they have me. They have a roof. They have chores. They have a place at my table. I may be old, and I may not know the first thing about your paperwork, but I know about responsibility. I know about caring for what's yours, and they're mine. They're my responsibility." He didn't give a long speech. He didn't plead. He simply stated a fact as he saw it. The children were his. The conviction in his voice, the raw, unadorned truth of it, filled the room. Mrs. Gable, who had come with him, added quietly about the improved conditions, the new clothes, the clear attachment. The board, faced with an overburdened system and a man willing to shoulder the burden, made an exception. Temporary guardianship, pending reviews. It was a compromise, but it was a victory. Walter returned home that evening. Eli and Sarah were waiting on the porch, their faces pale with worry. He got out of the truck, walked up the steps, and placed a hand on each of their heads, a gesture so foreign and gentle it made Eli's breath catch. "It's settled," Walter said. "You're staying. For now." That "for now" slowly melted away, replaced by the solid, unshakable reality of daily life. Walter taught Eli how to mend a fence, how to track the weather in the clouds, how to respect a horse. He showed Sarah how to knead bread dough, how to identify the edible wild berries at the edge of the pasture, how to hum the old folk songs Eleanor used to sing. He didn't do it with smiles and praise. He did it with quiet patience and an expectation of effort. And in that expectation, the children found something they'd never had, a standard to live up to, a belief that they were capable. One evening, months later, Walter came in from a long day of haying. He was exhausted, every bone aching. He walked into the living room and stopped. Sarah was sitting in Eleanor's old rocking chair, the kitten now a half-grown cat in her lap. She was humming one of the tunes, slightly off-key. Eli was at the table, tongue between his teeth, carefully repairing a broken strap on Walter's work satchel. The scene was so ordinary, so deeply and wonderfully domestic, that it stole the air from Walter's lungs. This was no longer a fortress against grief. This was a home, alive again. He didn't say anything. He went to the kitchen and started dinner. But that night, after the children were in bed, Eli in a proper room now, Sarah in another, Walter did something he hadn't done in 40 years. He walked to the photograph of Eleanor on the wall. He took it down. With a clean cloth, he gently wiped the glass until it shone. Then, he didn't place it back in its solitary tilted spot. He carried it to the mantelpiece above the fireplace, the heart of the home. He set it down square and centered. Next to it, he placed a recent photograph taken at the county fair. Walter standing stiffly between Eli and Sarah, both children smiling widely, cotton candy in their hands. The past and the present side by side, no longer competing, but conversing. Years flowed like the creek on the south pasture. Eli grew tall and strong, taking on more of the ranch work. Sarah's laughter became a common sound in the house. Walter grew older, his steps slower, but his eyes, once so empty, now held a quiet, constant light. He saw Eli graduate high school, saw Sarah win a science fair. He was there, in the back, his presence a steady anchor. When Walter passed, it was peacefully, in his sleep, in the house he had shared with his first family and found with his second. He was buried next to the small stone that bore his son Thomas's name, under the old oak tree on the hill. At the funeral, Eli, now a young man, spoke. His voice didn't crack. "He taught me that a man isn't defined by what he loses," Eli said, looking at the gathered crowd of neighbors, of Mrs. Gable, of Sarah. "He's defined by what he chooses to protect after the loss. Walter Macklin chose to protect us. And in doing so, he saved himself. The ranch didn't fade. Eli ran it with the same quiet dedication he'd learned. Sarah became a teacher in the town school. And in the house, on the mantel, the two photographs remained. The beautiful young woman from the 1940s, and the old rancher with the two children he'd found in the dark. The story of that cold night, of the stolen food and the plea that cracked open a frozen heart, became a local legend. But for Eli and Sarah, it was simply their origin story. It was the night their real life began. It was the night they learned that sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't facing down a threat, but whispering a truth to a stranger. We saved all day for this. And sometimes, the greatest act of kindness isn't giving charity, but recognizing a shared hunger and saying, "Come in, the table has room." The echo of that kindness reverberated through the rest of their lives. It taught them that family is a verb, an action of showing up, of staying, of mending what is broken. Be it a fence, a satchel strap, or a human heart. Walter's legacy wasn't the land or the cattle. It was the proof that it is never too late to let love back in, that the human heart, no matter how dusty, can begin to beat again with the rhythm of an unexpected, chosen family. And that a simple, shared meal can be the first sacrament of a new beginning.